Hi, my name is Guy Toubes, writer and executive producer of the Stinky and Dirty Show, and you're listening to the Go Creative Show.
Hey everyone, my name is Ben Consoli. I am a director and owner of BC Media Productions. And this is the Go Creative Show, the show dedicated to creative professionals in the video production and filmmaking industries. Guy Toubes is the writer and showrunner for the Emmy-nominated animated series, The Stinky and Dirty Show on Amazon Prime. As a prolific writer and story editor for countless children's shows, Guy has a unique perspective on telling stories that both entertain and teach children and adults. The Go Creative Show is sponsored by our friends at Rule Boston Camera, buy, rent, create at Rule.com, NewsShooter.com, essential news for real-world shooters, Hedge.video, Shutterstock.com, and PremiumBeat.com. Well, we have another first here on Go Creative Show. This is going to be our first time covering a children's show, which is really cool and unique. And I know you guys are going to love this one because there's a lot of things that go into writing stories for children's shows that can certainly be applied to writing for adult audiences. And Guy Toubes is the perfect person to talk about this because for the Stinky and Dirty Show on Amazon Prime, he is the writer, the showrunner, the executive producer. He's kind of in the middle of everything over there. He's working with the animators. He is a writer, the composers, the sound mix people. It's amazing the amount of work that this guy does, and the work that comes out of it is fantastic. Obviously, I'm not a child, although I certainly act like one on a lot of occasions. But the Stinky and Dirty Show was entertaining to me too, and I think that's the beauty of it. How do you entertain children and adults at the same time? And that's what this show is all about, and there's tons to talk about. And that's all coming up in just a couple of minutes. But before we get there, some big news on the way for Go Creative Show. We have a wild few episodes on the way for you. Get ready. We have the directors of photography for Bohemian Rhapsody, Ozark, Kidding. It's going to be back-to-back fantastic episodes, and there's so much more where that came from. And I just can't wait to share these interviews with you guys. It's all coming up in the upcoming week, so stay tuned, stay on the podcast, and share it with your friends as you have been, because so much good stuff to come. All right, let's talk about Rule Boston Camera. Rule Boston Camera is the place to go to purchase and rent all of your production equipment. Now, why do I go there all the time? I just went there. I feel like every time I talk to you guys about Rule, I had just come off of renting a package with them. And that's because I usually have. Just last week, we were doing a shoot. Anybody following me on Instagram saw the behind the scenes. It was a big shoot for us. We built a whole bunch of sets over at High Output in Boston, and we were using a ton of equipment from Rule Boston Camera. In this particular case, we were using the Odyssey 7Q with the Sony FS7. Now, here's the thing. That's not a piece of equipment we use all the time. And this is a perfect example of why Rule is awesome. So it's not something we use all the time. So we need to make sure that when we're using it, we know how to use it. We've been taught how to use it correctly. And if for some reason something goes wrong, we know that we have the support behind the scenes from Rule Boston Camera. And that is what you get when you work with Rule Boston Camera. You get support. You get technical guidance when you need it. In addition to all of that, they have a huge collection of equipment, lenses and cameras and lighting and sound stuff, movies and easy rigs, and just everything you can imagine is there in their warehouse. It's a toy store. It truly is. So besides having a world-class inventory of rental gear, you also have the peace of mind knowing that anything you rent is going to be supported. You will be supported by Rule Boston Camera. And that's what you need when you're doing these shoots. Time is money. Production is a mission-critical business. Every day is expensive, and you cannot waste a moment. And those are the reasons why I continue to go to Rule Boston Camera. Those guys have my back, they have the equipment, and they have the know-how. So head over to rule.com, RULE.com, buy some stuff, rent some stuff, and check out what they're doing over there. Rule.com, RULE.com. All right, let's do it. Let's dive right in to our interview with Guy Toubes. So I'm here with Guy Toubes, and this is actually our very first time having anybody on that has worked on and is currently working on children's television shows. This is a rare treat for us. So thank you so much, Guy, for being on.
It's the first time. It's about time.
It is about time. There's been a lot of new firsts this year, especially because we've had a lot of production designers. Our last guest was a production designer for like game shows and variety shows and stuff. We never had that on, so we've been expanding. We've been broadening our horizons, and you are another example of that. So we appreciate it.
Love it. Glad to be here.
So you've had a great career on tons and tons of shows. The Stinky and Dirty Show is one that I was sort of introduced to you through. I just watched a couple episodes of it in preparation for this show. I don't have kids, so I have really no reason to watch these shows. But I have to tell you, Stinky and Dirty Show, it really was entertaining. It's sort of like takes you back almost. Like it gives you that feeling of like staying home sick from school and watching TV all day. You know what I mean? It just has that really warm feeling about it. And I'd love to start there and kind of talk about where that show came from, how you got started on it, and what you do for the show.
Well, it's funny. What you mentioned is really interesting in putting in the context of what kids TV is and what makes it good, which is obviously completely subjective. But I was a stay-at-home dad for 5 years.
Oh.
So I watched a lot of kids' TV. I mean, I watched a lot of kids' TV. I sat there with my newborn as he grew up and watched a lot of this sort of mind-numbing at times stuff.
Yeah.
And sat next to him. And I always kept thinking to myself, if I ever do this, I'm going to make sure that I'm thinking about the mom or dad sitting next to the kid, and it's got to entertain them too. It's got to be something that both of them are into.
That's got to be hard to do.
That's the easy part for me.
Really?
A lot of kids TV, especially for preschoolers, for this age group, which is very young, and what they can conceive and how they sort of process what a story is very different from how adults process what a story is. So once you sort of go through all the hoops of, are we telling a story kids can understand? And is it something that they can relate to? Then the easy part for me is, how do we make it entertaining for both kids and parents? I always think of the mom or dad watching next to the kid. I'm always thinking of myself back when I was watching TV with my son.
And what were those shows when you were staying at home watching TV with your kid? What were you watching?
Well, I don't want to say the bad shows. I don't want to mention the ones that sort of, but there were certain shows that, because they were silly or because I connected with them on a different way, in a different manner, my son would sort of look to me and see me laughing. I'll mention the good shows, like Sesame Street, for instance.
Sure.
I grew up watching Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers and The Electric Company. Those were my preschool shows. I loved those shows. They were my introduction to television. So it was a no-brainer introducing my son to those shows when he was a kid. And Sesame Street was sort of one of those where I put it on. I was like, oh, I remember loving this show. And I put it on, and Julia Roberts is sitting there talking to Elmo.
Wow.
And I remember my reaction. He goes, hi, Julia. And I was like, oh, my God, that's Julia Roberts. And my son just looked up at me like, oh, you're interested in this thing that I'm watching on TV? And all of a sudden, we were both connected in different ways. But it always sort of stayed with me like, wow, if we're both connected to the television, it's not just a babysitter. It's not just sitting there. We're both watching this. We're both engaged. It's working on two levels. That's what I want to aspire to when I'm creating that kind of TV.
Now, you mentioned storytelling just a couple minutes ago and trying to create a story for kids and adults, but they absorb things very differently. I mean, kids, like your show, may be the very first or one of the first stories that these kids even see. Like they haven't yet been trained to watch TV yet they do, and they follow along. So what is going into your story development when you're making a show for kids, knowing that they haven't really been trained yet to absorb it?
That is the challenge. And I didn't come from a preschool world. I came from a very eclectic world where, I know story, I get, acts and ticking clocks and all that kind of stuff. But all that sort of goes out the window when you're working with child development specialists who are saying, time isn't all that meaningful for kids. You can tell a kid, hey, we got to go in 5 minutes. And they're like, okay. But it really doesn't matter to them. They're not keeping track of that time. So if you're a writer and you want to put some stakes in a script, and you want to add that ticking clock, it doesn't really work with kids. So it's a major challenge. It's a major issue trying to figure out, what is something that would feel like stakes for the kids? And you have to sort of dig into your empathy. You have to dig into what it was like when you were a kid. And in my case, watching my kids as they watch TV, understanding their emotional reactions. You sort of have to deconstruct what a story is instead of going straight to, you need a ticking clock or you need some stakes. Well, it's not just that. It's like, what's the emotion behind it that a kid can also relate to, and then reconstruct the story in that way.
Must be refreshing in a way. I mean, you're like really boiling things down to just their bare bones, and a kid is not going to continue watching. When they are disinterested, it's over.
Right. Well, you got that right.
Yes.
You say you don't have kids?
I've been around enough of them to realize that when they're done with you, they're done. And it can happen so fast. And they don't follow the same, like, how to phrase it. It's like they don't follow the same guidelines, I guess, as human interaction as adults do. When they're like, they can, as adults, you can kind of push someone's story along. You can kind of accept some dips in it or some delays in it because after having seen so many stories throughout your life that there's a payoff at the other end. With a kid show and children audiences, they don't know what to expect. And my guess is that they don't really give you the time that you may need to develop a story.
Absolutely. It's moment to moment with kids. You want to make sure you're keeping their interest. And not just for, because you want ratings and you want them to see the show, but also because you really want them to be engaged in what we're trying to teach, for lack of a better word. The Stinky and Dirty Show has a very specific curriculum. And we came up with it at Amazon with Dr. Alice Wilder. She's been in children's television for a long time, and it was sort of an introduction to a different way of teaching or doing children's television than I had ever been introduced to, than I had ever worked with before. And she gave me two ideas of what we could make the curriculum for the Stinky and Dirty Show. One of them would be like recycling. It's obvious because Stinky is a garbage truck. So recycling, reuse, recycle, that sort of stuff. And then she said, well, but we could also do something more interesting, or she didn't say interesting. I thought it was more interesting. She said, we could also do something like resourcefulness. And resourcefulness is not facts or figures, but it's a way of thinking. It's how to think almost. It's looking around and seeing what you have at your disposal in order to solve a problem. And then not being afraid to fail, which happens often on the Stinky and Dirty Show. They're constantly failing and not minding and coming up with a new way to approach the same problem until finally, of course, at the end of every episode, they succeed. So I sort of latched onto that. I'm like, resourcefulness that's storytelling, coming upon an obstacle, figuring out how to get around it, failing, and then trying again until you finish, until you get to the end, until you solve the problem, and the story is over.
I definitely saw that trend in the episodes that I saw, and the fact that they're coming up with an idea, going through with it, realizing the problems with the idea, and fixing them along the way. Like that seems to happen. I think each episode I saw, there were two stories, and they both, I guess all four, kind of had a very similar trajectory to it, where they did succeed at the end, but they were problem solving along the way the whole time, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Absolutely. And like I said, it's sort of a way of thinking. It's Stinky and Dirty have a way of thinking where they don't care if they mess up. And that's, you were saying something, it might be freeing. That is a freeing way of looking at any problem. Being okay with not getting it right, with failing. We have another consultant on the show. Her name is Jessica Leahy, an author. She wrote this book, The Gift of Failure. And it's all about how, as parents, we sort of do too much for our kids. We don't let them do things on their own, and it's become a trend. And it used to be that kids would, do their homework on their own, bring it to school, and, get it all marked up and get it wrong, and, have to figure out for themselves how to fix that and how to get it right the next time. And too often, parents are sort of looking over kids' shoulders and saying, "Oh no, that's wrong." And there's a lot of emphasis on getting it right the first time, rather than allowing kids to fail and then allowing them to come up with a way of thinking that solves what went wrong with how they failed. And that's what we're trying to do with the show, change the way kids think. If they put themselves into Stinky and Dirty's brains, if they're part of, if they're living the story that Stinky and Dirty are living, they're trying to figure out how to solve the problem too. And Stinky and Dirty's characters, this is something you were talking about before, where you want to keep a kid's attention from moment to moment. Well, Stinky and Dirty are kids, and they're goofy and silly, and it was really important for me for them to be the fun kids that you want to hang out with, who aren't afraid to make mistakes, who think it's funny sometimes if you fall down or if you spin out or that kind of stuff, and move on and go to the next thing. And that's all part of the game. It's all part of the fun of what we do from day to day.
An interesting storytelling tool that you guys use is this think draw. Mm-hmm. And explain to the audience what that is. I thought it was really unique. When I saw it the first time, I thought it was just, a one-time thing. But I'm realizing the more I watch that this is a common theme in all the episodes, and it's a really unique way of showing how these characters think.
Well, that's it. How do you dramatize thinking, right? I mean, we had two characters that, for me, always, Stinky is sort of the impulsive one. He just goes and does and tries things. And Dirty's sort of the more analytical one. And sometimes he knows you got to, wait a second, we need to think about this for a little bit. And Stinky loves that. He's like, let me help. So what happens is Dirty takes a little of the dirt from his shovel and puts it on the ground, and he starts to draw. He's got a talent. He can draw. And when he draws, he, the show sort of moves into that frame. We see the drawing come to life. It animates, and it's a 2D animation in our 3D world. And they're using their catchphrase, "What if?" And they're thinking of things that they couldn't necessarily act out because they're just blue skying. They're coming up with the craziest things that they can even think of, just in the hopes that it'll give them some idea of how they can solve this problem that they've been up against the whole time.
And it looks really cool. It's a little break from the animation style, which is very nice looking. I mean, to begin with, the show's really, it looks cool. But then you have this little break, which I think is, it's a different look, and it adds some color to it. And I really think that was a very interesting approach to it. I thought that was cool.
Well, thanks. It's funny. The show is it's 3D animation, which tends to be not, when you think of the classic Warner Brothers cartoons, obviously they weren't 3D animation. They weren't computer generated. Yeah. You don't have the same kind of fun stuff you can do in 2D animation. So this was also my and the animators' opportunity to do all those classic cartoon gags, like, stars spinning around your head and, flying out into space and using funny sound effects and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I definitely want to talk a lot about the production here and sort of how the show develops, particularly audio, because there are so many audio cues. But before I get there, I want to stay a little bit more on story development, because
Sure.
I'm curious now. There's a lot of talk about Mr. Rogers. He's being celebrated left to right. He had the documentary. Tom Hanks just released the picture of him playing Mr. Rogers a couple days ago. And there's a lot of talk about how he was able to tackle important topics on the show. I don't know if you're watching Kidding on Showtime with Jim Carrey, but he plays kind of a Mr. Rogers type character. And the first episode, which is the only one I've seen so far, is about him struggling to get the topic of death on his show. And they talk a lot about like how are they going to allow him to get that topic on the show, and how are they going to do it? In watching this in your show, obviously the episodes I am watching do not handle death, but I'm curious, like, are there topics and storylines that you guys are purposely putting in there that are a little bit heavier?
We haven't approached it like that. I mean, Mr. Rogers, even when he, first of all, I just want to say, Mr. Rogers was a huge influence on me.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, that was the show. It was sort of sandwiched between Sesame Street and the Electric Company. Yeah. And that was the one I would, get up on my knees and wait for Mr. Rogers. Couldn't wait to go into the land of make believe. I love, by the way, that you're talking about the Electric Company.
I don't think it's brought up enough, and it's such a great show.
Hey, you guys. Yeah. I mean,
it's perfect.
This was my childhood.
Exactly.
But yeah, Mr. Rogers, and I haven't seen the Jim Carrey show. It sounds fascinating.
It's really good. It's good.
Well, Mr. Rogers back then, he was dealing with a less compartmentalized age group. So I think you had older kids who were watching along with the younger kids, who really could sort of put their, put their brain around that sort of idea. But we tend to stay with simple, tangible goals on the Stinky and Dirty show. But we did, you said you watched the waiting games.
I like the waiting game a lot.
Yeah, we did tackle, and that was an interesting one. We tackled
patience.
Patience, exactly. Which may not seem like a big issue for adults, and but for kids, it's probably one of the hardest things they have to deal with, and one of the things they have the least control over. Patience, yeah. So that was different. It was the least. It sort of represented a different way of going about how to solve a problem, because the only solution is to wait. So how do you wait?
Yeah, that was a really cool one. Now, was that the one that got nominated for the Emmy?
Yeah, that was our Emmy-nominated. That's the one we submitted for the Emmy nomination.
Well, it's a great episode, and that really did keep my attention, especially, and I have a very short attention span. Maybe I should be watching kid shows. I think that's what it is. I think that's what I need. But it was cool, and it was an interesting topic to handle, and a universal topic, but especially for kids. I thought that was very unique, and that was actually kind of what spawned my earlier question of, are you trying to tackle more adult topics? Because that one seemed not heavy like death, obviously, but it was more. It was conceptual, and it was more than just how to navigate a road or taking a better picture or the other things that I had seen in the episodes I watched.
Right, and it's funny because when we were brainstorming this episode, the executives at Amazon were like, "How are you going to make waiting for something dramatic? I just don't see it." And so that was our challenge. But for me, it is always in those little moments, and it always feels like to me that Stinky and Dirty can occupy themselves. So I knew that even though they were impatient, finding ways to occupy themselves wouldn't be a challenge. And then the most controversial part of the story, you've seen it obviously, was we thought, one method, one way of being resourceful about how to wait would be to just count.
Yes.
Keep counting. And so we were proposing, well, they could keep counting to 10 or they can keep counting further. And then it seemed like they just keep the best solution to having to wait was, let's just count until it's over, until they open the gate and let us out. And the executives were really nervous, like, I don't know, how high are they going to count to? And we were like, maybe 30, 40, 50. And then finally we came up with 100 because 100 was a nice round number. And that was really scary to everybody. How are we going to make counting to 100 interesting for as long as it takes to count to 100 on the show? And for a minute, I was like, I don't know, that sounds like really tough. And I was thinking of myself as the adult watching next to the kid. And I was thinking in my brain that they're going through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the adult sitting next to the kid is thinking, they're not really going to do this, are they? They're not just going to keep counting.
Exactly.
8, 9, 10, 11. Oh my God, they're really doing this. I don't know if I can handle this.
I thought 10 was going to be it. And then it went to 20 and I'm like, okay, well, maybe 20. Then I'm like, well, it can't be 30. It's got to be 50. You're not going to end at 30. And then when it went beyond 50, I'm like, are they seriously counting to 100 right now? It's like,
but that laugh is what happens, right? Because all of a sudden you realize, oh my God, they're going for this. This is hilarious.
Yes. And I love how it sort of, it false ends at 99, which I thought was great. It really is a great episode. I mean, obviously we don't have children listening to this show, but if you guys have kids out there, certainly you should be watching the show with your kids. But even if you don't, this is kind of a standout episode. And I think it's helpful from a storytelling standpoint to just see how they got around something so simple. And I mean, honestly, something so boring as listening to somebody talk to count to 100. But to actually pull that off and make that interesting that is really remarkable. I was thinking to myself, what did the script look like that you handed in? Was it truly just 1, 2, 3, all the way to 100?
It was not, because first of all, I really trust the animators at Brown Bag Films in Ireland. They're amazing. And I was inspired I knew we could do this show because they had done little vignettes of Stinky and Dirty just goofing off that played under the credits of season 1. And I hadn't scripted any of those. And I looked at them, they were just playing under the credits. I looked at them and I thought to myself, that's entertaining just as it is. And that made me feel confident that we could do this. And so it wasn't enough to just say that. Every part of the script was thought through and the action was written as it was. So, for those who are listening and haven't seen it, they're dancing, they're singing in rhythm, they're doing voices, they're counting to 100 every creative, goofy, silly way you can think of. And the music played a huge part in it too. I worked really closely with Jake Monaco doing the score to make sure that it would really pop, that it would really be fun to watch.
It's season 201, episode 6, I think, The Waiting Game.
Yes.
You can find it there on Amazon Prime. Let's talk about audio. Let's just dive into it because it's something that I really latched onto. I'm currently in the process of working with my mix engineer and doing like a sound design for a 4-part video, corporate video for like a trade show. But it's a 4-part video, and so my mind right now is on audio and sound design. So I've been laser focused on that as I was watching. And one of the things I noticed is that there are an enormous amount of audio cues. I mean, the audio cues really tell you how to feel when you're watching this. I'd love to talk about the strategy in that, because as an adult watching it, it feels like too much. But as a kid, it must just keep you engaged beyond the visuals, obviously. And I'd love to talk more about the strategy on how you come up with your, your soundtracks and
Yeah.
your audio design.
Well, first of all, props to our Emmy-nominated sound design.
Yeah.
So you latched onto something that really came through.
It's
and
fantastic.
I'll give you, they're so impressive, and they even put out a little video. Maybe I'll send you a link.
Yeah, do it. I'll put it on the show notes.
They went and got real sounds. They're over in Ireland too. They went out and got practical sounds for everything that Stinky, Dirty, and all the construction vehicles in Go City do.
No way.
Great stuff. I mean, they went the extra mile. And it was really important when we conceived of the show. Something that was in the original picture books was that each of the vehicles made the sounds. So they say the word vroom, and they say the word scree, and they say they say all these words. But then the question was, well, should they actually say the words, or should we use sound effects for those words? And for me, it was too fun not to say the words.
Yeah. But
it also took away from the idea of all the great actual sounds that these vehicles make. When I was a kid, and maybe when you were a kid, and when I was playing with my trucks, I would make all the noises for them too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it was important for all of that stuff to be in there and to approximate as best as possible what the sound sounds like. So it was sort of a nuance of how much sound effect and how much voice only we use. And in the mix, you can see when we went through our mixes, there was always this back and forth with bring up the dialogue a little more, but they would always sort of bring up the sound effects track a little more. And there was sort of this go between until we finally figured out the right level, the right compromise of how much each one sits in the mix.
Yeah, I thought that was a very interesting choice to have in a world where sound effects control the story. I thought it was a very interesting choice to have the talent be the ones making those noises, like the screech and the vroom sound. It was cool because it made you think of like playing, like kids playing.
Absolutely. I mean, it should feel like that. They are playing, even though they have jobs and they're doing stuff every day that is their job, and they're proud of what they do. The idea of doing your job and it's a job seems sad if you can't make your job into something that's playing. I mean, maybe it's just me, but I feel like what I do all day is still playing.
Yeah.
It's still, doing something that is interesting to me, and the best work comes out of something I enjoy doing. And that's really just playing.
Let's take a moment and talk about Hedge. What is Hedge? Of course, anybody listening to Go Creative Show knows what Hedge is because I've been raving about it for almost a year now, maybe even over a year. Hedge is a backup software for filmmakers. How important is that? You spend all day making pretty pictures, making things perfect. It's all being recorded onto these media cards, and you need to make sure that the media is backed up well, correctly, fast. All of those things are what you're going to get with Hedge. You can import multiple sources and send it to multiple destinations at the same time, which is perfect for people like me, and I'm sure you, who want to make sure you have multiple backups before you go and have a card reformatted, right? You don't just want one backup. That is risky. So with Hedge, you can have multiple sources, send it to multiple destinations. I use it over lunch all the time. I'm often my own DIT, and we'll break for lunch. I'll grab all the media cards. I'll plug them all into Hedge, my hard drives, and I get a notification on my phone when the transfer is done because I'm using the Hedge Connect app for my iPhone. So you have convenience. You also have peace of mind knowing that everything's being backed up correctly. And you know that the Hedge app is being updated constantly. There are so many updates to that app, it's unbelievable. And they're always adding new functionality. So I strongly encourage you guys, go check it out. Go to hedge.video/Go Creative Show. You're going to get a 20% off discount from the full price. But there's all sorts of licensing options. There's a free tier. There's just so much there. And I strongly encourage you to check it out. Hedge.video/Go youtube.video/GoCreativeShow. All right, there's so much more to talk about with Guy Toubes, so why don't we just get back to it, shall we? Here he is, Guy Toubes, talking more about his show, The Stinky and Dirty Show. Can you sort of walk me through production? Like how do you approach a new episode that's coming up? Like what's the first step for you?
The first step is a big brainstorm with our writing team, and then even with our curriculum consultants. We talk about every episode. We sort of narrowed it down to every episode is sort of a how-to at its base. How to make mud. how to go if you don't have any gas. It's all a how-to, and then we put together all the tries and fails of how they're able to do it, and then we go through our curriculum consultant and make sure it's something that kids can understand and can relate to.
Is a curriculum consultant like a standard role on any kid show?
Not every kid show, but there's often, especially on preschool shows, an education consultant. It was always important for Amazon that the kinds of shows that they put out there are shows that kids will relate to on a different level, on a higher level. We had a higher purpose making this show than just any other kid show out there. And so it was important for our show that kids can engage in a way that's meaningful, and that it's not just entertainment. It's actually something that's going to entertain, but also be helpful in their development.
So you start at the curriculum. You say this is the how-to. This is the problems we want to solve. These are the conflicts that they're going to run into.
Right.
What's the next step from there?
Well, the writers and I will break the story on a whiteboard and take about 2 or 3 hours, and there are certain things that we need to make sure are in every episode. And then we'll go to outline and through the script process. And that'll all go through the animation and production company. The directors will tell us what they can and can't accomplish in animation until we finally have a script ready to go. That everybody hopefully approves is ready to go. And then we'll do the voice records. And we've been lucky because we've gotten a lot of celebrity voices, which is a lot of fun for me.
Yes, I saw Mark Hamill as one of your voices.
That was sort of like dream come true for a kid who grew up in the 80s. So one of the vehicles we have is Spacey, the space shuttle, spaceship. And we thought, who would be more perfect than Mark Hamill to play the space vehicle in Go City? We do the voice records. Once the voices are recorded, we send the voices over to our animators, and they start the work of drawing. And they draw storyboards, and they put the drawn storyboards together with the voices in a sort of little movie that's called an animatic.
Yeah.
And the animatic we edit to time. It's just, words and pictures, sort of fake animation, until it's ready to go to the actual animators. And then the actual animators take that animatic and painstakingly animate each and every frame until we have the final animation.
I'm so blown away by animation. I've never really done anything that involves that. Everything I'm doing is live action. There may be some like 3D effects or something like that, but never just a purely animated piece. It seems just mind-blowingly slow to me. Like I feel like I'd be driven crazy if I was on an animation show.
It is. It's really hard to wait. It's like in the waiting games. You really have to, keep counting until the thing's ready. It's really,
what if you want to change
really hard
something?
To wait.
What if you want to change something? Like, is there any ability to make changes, or I mean, it just seems like the smallest change could be weeks of animation.
Yes, it's limited. The amount of changes you can make is limited. And so that's why you have the animatic process. Usually you try to make every possible change during your animatic. That includes like retakes for voices, or drawing the scene differently or putting them in a different location. You want to do that before the animation even starts.
Yeah.
So your animatic is sort of key. But we also have a process once it's animated where we see the final animation and we can call creative retakes. And Brown Bag was really good about the amount of creative retakes we could have. And so we could send an entire shot back and say, you know what, this isn't working. We have to do it differently. And that was part of our budget. And that a lot of times the best parts of the show were where we were able to do our creative retakes.
That animatic that you're getting, did it have facial expressions on there too?
As much as possible. It's hard because, you really want to push the facial expressions. And these are, I like to call them puppets.
Yeah.
In 3D animation, essentially, you're not drawing every frame. You're creating a puppet on the computer that moves and squashes and stretches and does facial expressions. And in some sense, it's a little limited. You can't just draw the expression you want. It can only go the amount. The smile can only be as wide as the puppet allows it to be. So you have to be careful about what the storyboard artist draws. They might draw something that looks great, and you're like, wow, that's great. But the puppet can't actually achieve that. So as much as possible, we try to say, hey, this is great, but can that actually be achieved with our model?
Like when you make a new character, do you tell the animation company like, okay, give me this new character and show me like all the facial expressions it can do? How happy can it be? How big can its eyes be? How big can its smile be? So you have a sense of what these characters can do before you write for them.
Yes, there's a package. I mean, when we started the show, we didn't have all that stuff. And there weren't things, we were writing in things that they couldn't do. And I'll give you an example. One of the things that we wanted was for Dirty to be able to swing that digger arm over and give a little hug to Stinky. And so we wrote that into a script, and they came back and said, we can't do that. Sorry, but we have to break the model if we're going to do something like that. And we were like, well, that's really important. I think it sort of would be one of the signature poses of the show. Yeah. One buddy putting his arm around another buddy. And they were great. They went back in and they redesigned the model, and it was really important to the directors too. They thought, yeah, we really need to have that. And they bought into it, and they went back and redid that particular model, and allowed Dirty to be able to do that. And now it's in just about every episode, I think.
Yeah, I saw that. And obviously I wasn't thinking it was a broken model doing that. It just seemed like a cool animation choice. But it's sort of like, you're kind of like, it's like working with real actors. I mean, they have their limitations. They have their abilities. And it's weird to me that there are, it seems like animation is challenging because you can do anything. So it's interesting to me to hear that there are limitations with 3D. I mean, I know nothing. Anybody listening to the show that's 3D is probably screaming right now saying, how stupid can you be? But I don't know anything about it. And to me, it just seems like anything can happen.
No, I agree. One of the fun things about when I got into animation, and I just sort of came into animation out of nowhere, was in 2D animation, you really can write just about anything, and as long as it can be drawn. And now that 3D animation is so prevalent and so it seems like preferred in the world of animation, you have to rethink that idea, because you can't just draw anything anymore. You are working, I think of it as a puppet show. You're working with puppets and environments. It is more like a live action show. And the only time we get to play, I sort of touched on this earlier, is when they do the think draw, because that is in 2D. So all those great ideas that we have that maybe aren't able to be accomplished in 3D animation, that's where we throw into our 2D animation.
So you are an animator as well as a writer?
I am not. No, don't.
I
don't
thought
want to
you
give
were.
you the wrong information. No, but I'm overseeing the process. So I'm talking to animators for the first time in a long time. For the first time, in a supervisory position. As the showrunner, I have to be able to speak that language. I have to be able to talk to them and say, "Here's what we want." To the point where sometimes I'm even sending photos of myself making an expression, saying, "This is the expression we want for Stinky at this moment. This is the expression we want for Dirty," or drawing diagrams of what the location should look like, that sort of thing. But no, I have zero drawing talent. I have zero animation talent. I have much respect for the team I'm working with in Ireland, and I just love what they can do, and I love that they allow me to tell them what I'm dreaming of, and then are able to make what I'm dreaming of come true.
You are listening to the PremiumBeat.com Song of the Week. It's called Seeking Perfection by Vincent Tone. PremiumBeat.com is where to go for all of your royalty-free music and sound effects. Go to PremiumBeat.com and access a collection of thousands of royalty-free tracks for as low as $49 each. You heard me right, $49. And you don't just get the track. No, you get so much more than that. You get cut downs, you get loop sets, so you can customize the track to fit your project perfectly. But the most important thing is quality, and that's what you're going to get at PremiumBeat.com. So head over there, PremiumBeat.com, and check out what they have to offer. Of course, there's a link to this song in the show notes over at GoCreativeShow.com. But the best thing to do is just get right over to PremiumBeat.com, search around, find something you love, buy it, use it. You'll be happy, your clients will be happy. And lastly, I want to talk about Shutterstock.com. Shutterstock is awesome. It really is. And I go there certainly to buy a ton of stuff, but I go there sometimes just for inspiration. Like if I've been editing all day, I just need to see something different. I want to be inspired by something. I've gone over there and just looked through their curated collections, and they have so many really nice collections there with beautiful footage. I mean, when it comes down to it, if you're going to be going to Shutterstock.com and using their footage in conjunction with yours on a project, you want to make sure that it's of the same quality or better than what you have. And that's what you're going to find over there. There is over 11 million royalty-free video clips on Shutterstock.com, and many of them are in 4K, which is great. Because, I know if any of you guys are like me, a lot of your projects now are shooting in 4K and delivering in 4K, which is great. And Shutterstock is the perfect place to go for really well-curated, really high-quality footage, whether it's HD or 4K. Of course, they have images. They have an editorial section, music, all sorts of stuff. But generally, I start at Shutterstock.com/footage. I start there and just kind of enjoy my search. It's a lot of fun going through there and seeing what pops up. So check it out, Shutterstock.com. All right, still more to go. Still more with Guy Toubes. And it's starting, or it's continuing, I should say, right now. As a showrunner, we've had showrunners on the show before, but for live action stuff, film, TV shows and whatnot, how is showrunning different for animation than it is for live action?
I feel like it's the same, but with less resources and less respect from the world.
Well, we respect you here at Go Creative
Thank
Show.
you.
Anytime
Thank
you
you.
feel disrespected, you can come here and we'll give you a pat on the back.
Well, I just think, this is my first time as a showrunner. And knowing what the world is like, knowing what the kind of resources a showrunner has on live action or prime time or other aspects of the business. And knowing that most showrunners work from a place of passion where this is your baby, you want to make it work and you're putting in those kinds of hours. I I feel like sometimes people have no idea what goes into making this show, what it is. Um, Especially on the Stinky and Dirty show, we're so far away from each other. The production team in Ireland, I go every few months or so for a couple of weeks. But generally, I'm here in the States working with the writing team and with the voice record team. And that's challenging to try and keep the hours that I can do Skype calls, I can do conference calls on Ireland time, and then spend the whole rest of the day making sure the scripts are in order and doing the other stuff that's done here on this side of the Atlantic.
Mm. Yeah, that's working. I've had a couple of stints when I was either in Europe working on projects there that are also in communication with people in LA or here in Boston, or vice versa. And when you are working with teams that are in different parts of the globe, your day becomes a lot longer. It starts earlier, it ends later, and you're basically doing 2 shifts to make it work. So I can imagine doing that on a regular basis where you're working on multiple episodes, new seasons, and my God, it's a lot.
Yeah, it's a ton. And my experience as a showrunner has been essentially, the way to describe it is it takes over your life. It is everything. If you care about it, it takes over your life. And it's nice when it all comes around and pays off. But when you're in it, sometimes it feels like it's never going to end.
I have one last question about this before we start wrapping up, but I'm just curious. You're working with children or kid voiceover artists.
Right.
Their voices are going to change.
Yes.
Are you thinking in those terms? Like, will your characters age to reflect the change in voice? I mean, how are you guys going to deal with that?
They'll stay the same age, and it's already happened, Ben. It's already happened. Our first season, we had 2 amazing voice actors. They were great. Jaden Betts and Jacob Gunther played Stinky and Dirty, and saddest thing in the world, their voices changed when it was time to do our second season. And so we had to recast.
Oh, you just pick new people.
We've already recast our Stinky and Dirty. And also amazing voice actors. Isaac Ryan Brown and Jet Juergensmeyer are the new voices of Stinky and Dirty. And I'm really hoping we quickly turn around to do season 3 so that we don't have the same issue we had from season 1 to season 2.
Oh my God, I can imagine. So they must just be, I don't know if anything I saw was from season 1. I think it might have all been from season 2.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I was really worried about that because it's the kind of thing I would have noticed when I was a kid.
Oh yeah.
Hey, voice changed. But there was really nothing we could do. I mean, we couldn't just stop them from aging.
You can try, but I guess like 3D animation, there are some limitations to what we can do in this world.
Yes.
So what is next for you as we wrap up? Are we getting into a 3rd season? Are we moving on to another show? Where are you at?
I'm crossing my fingers about another season. We have a lot of great ideas. It's in the works, but nothing is for sure yet. So in the meantime, I'm working on a great new show for Disney Junior. I'm the head writer and story editor. It's called TOTS, and it stands for Tiny Ones Transport Service. And it takes place in the world of storks who deliver babies all around the world. And the main characters are a penguin and a flamingo who want to join the TOTS service, the first non-storks at TOTS.
That's cool. That's fun. An interesting premise. I like that.
Yeah, it's hilarious.
I saw an article. Your PR agency sent me an article when it had been greenlit, saying that it's going to be premiering in 2019. That's exciting.
Yeah, we're very excited. It looks great. Everything is coming together. It's just a beautiful looking show.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for being on the show. I mean, lots of great insight here. And I think these are lessons that any storyteller can pull. I really do think, story is certainly universal. Yeah, you have to tweak for different audiences, but when it comes down to it, it's about being compelling and telling interesting stories. And that's what you guys are doing there over at the Stinky and Dirty Show, and I'm sure at Tots as well. So we're so happy to have you here.
Thanks, Ben. You made it painless.
I try. There he goes, Guy Toubes. What a great guest. You think about a kid's show and you're like, oh, it's just something, you put on TV to entertain your kids. Don't really think about it too much. But there is so much there. There's so much great storytelling there. And it's interesting to hear from his perspective how he engages with two different audiences. I found that fascinating. And I hope you guys did too. Of course, check out the show on Amazon Prime, The Stinky and Dirty Show. You'll enjoy it. You'll have fun with it. I want to thank our sponsors, Rule Bust and Camera, Newsshooter.com, Hedge.video, Shutterstock.com, and PremiumBeat.com. Without these guys, the show wouldn't exist. That would stink, right? Especially since we have so much great content coming up on the way. I am so excited about that, if you can't tell. I also want to thank Matt Russell, because the show wouldn't happen if he wasn't around either. So check his website out, GainStructure.com. and on Twitter @GainStructure. And of course, you can tweet us @GoCreativeShow. Let us know what you think of the show. Give us some guest suggestions. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.